Hello there friends, Steve Turgoose here. A new year, a quick look back at the old one. In fact, maybe a quick look back on my whole life, our lives. Maybe you share the same experiences too. And I wanted to look back at, from this point in now, where I'm standing now, my perception of life, my perspective of the world now. I found one of the hardest things with now, here, is remembering why I saw the world a different way before. Sort of like before you fall in love, before you meet your first true love and fall in love. You maybe don't know how love feels, you know. And then afterwards you can't quite remember how it felt not to feel like that. I don't know, I think you know what I'm saying. So now, you know, leading up to now, I've been looking for ways of trying to be free and just to help others be free and to enjoy life and things, you know. From what I see, I don't like what the system is doing to people. What it's done to people. The fear and the suffering that it causes, the confusion that the system causes. And then I have to look into the system. What is the system? Is it a set of political philosophies? Is it a set of government legislation? Is it laws of kings and queens? Or does it go higher into biblical law or divine law? And what is all of that? Who gets to decide? These are the types of questions that I was looking for. I asked myself a lot of little, posed myself a lot of little theoretical questions, you know. Making up little stories in my head about how I come out for a walk one day and I see some smoke rising between the trees, and I wander over to see a little pile of embers smouldering away, and on this pile of embers there's some books burned to a cinder, and there's just half of a book left, and I stamp out the fire and stop the book from burning all the way and read the cover, and it says on the cover, how to operate a civil servant. You know, and the idea of having actually an instruction manual of how to control police and government agents and politicians, how to actually get some power in this system. I wanted such a book. And I imagined what such a book would be, and I even began to actually write in my head this book. And it came to me, the idea, like, there's the computer text adventure games where it says you are standing in a dark room, there are, there's a box. And then you type in, open the box, and it says there is a switch in the box, and you turn the switch on. The light is turned on to reveal a room. And depending on what commands you type in, you get different responses, but they're all commands and prompts and responses that are programmed by the software itself. And so I'm looking at the system thinking, well, it has to be like a kind of a software with commands and responses. And when you think about police and civil servants and bureaucrats and people, they seem to be bound to a chain of commands, you know, like computer commands. So I'm thinking this book is going to be easier than I thought to write. But there's one problem with such a book. What if it falls in the wrong hands? So the book has to be coded. It has to be simple enough for those who were worthy to be able to decode the thing quite easily. Haha, I see. Yeah, it's an instruction manual of how to control civil servants. But for those who are not worthy, are looking for power maybe or something in the wrong places, it backfires, you know. The book reads like some kind of comedy novel. It kind of tickles our fancy, and our fancy's been already tickled, so what we read into things becomes fairy tales by default, rather than the idea that somebody's like kind of winking at you saying, you know, this is a fairy tale, but I'm trying to say something to you in secret. Something far more important and far simpler. Like the enemy's on his way, or, you know, there's a cream cake in the oven. So such a book, you know, how would I write such a book? And laws themselves, you know, statutes, acts of parliament control our lives, you know, and it confused me totally, you know, why do we have to have these arbitrary laws in place that everyone seems to follow? And what can you do when you go to court and you say, oh no, I don't follow this society? And the judge says, okay, then off you go. And then you just have to tell everybody else, and it would be, yeah, you know, an uprising. People would just take the law into their own hands. If there was some system you could just simply say, oh no, I'm free. I'm a free man. Okay then. Imagine going into court and, you know, sort of like going in there, finding my neutral space, relaxed, get seated and lean back and say, the law rather appeals to me, actually. And the judge leans forward and pounds his gavel and says, court appellate to him. And then there's a little door in the back, and the judge says, come through this little door. And you go through the door. And he says, I'm going to tell you the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And the judge sits there and he tells you in all secrecy and privacy behind this little door in the courtroom and says, you know, tells you the truth about the system, about the legal system, about the court system, about your place in society, about how the system works, about how this massive show is legitimized, and what the purpose of life really is, and what it wants you to be as your human potential, and how it's trying. And then the truth that you hear, in the whole truth, the truth and nothing but the truth, all the whole and the whole-o. And then you just can't believe it. You think to yourself, when I leave this courtroom, if I try and even tell anybody this stuff, they won't believe it. They would think I was crazy. And then, you know, you'd end up in a lunatic asylum knowing the truth. Or maybe you get lucky and they ship you away to some island somewhere. This is what's going on through my head, you know. I'm thinking, if there's such a system, it's going to be like that. It's going to be so obvious that we're kind of missing it. Funny, really. I mean, how long have I been using? 9 minutes. I'll ramble on. I'll go back some years. Beliefs, belief systems, because we're talking about systems, belief systems, you know. Let's go back some years. You know, when I was born, I remember that one of the first things that I remembering was the fractal nature of the universe. You know, I was younger than I could even write. I didn't have words for things, really. And I remember contemplating running to the edge of the universe, and then there was a wall. I'd jump over the wall and carry on running. There was another wall, and I'd realised it was just a fractal. It was just a loop. And from wherever we're standing, all we're able to see is the next event's horizon. And so that fractal nature of reality seemed to me to be a much better concept to comprehend in my head for the size and place of reality and time to a certain degree. I remember later on having the idea that I was communicating with an alien who was communicating through telepathy, saying that they don't travel through spaceships and move their physical bodies because it's kind of waste of time when you can beam your mind through telepathy, through space, immediately to any planet. Just have to find a willing host. And, you know, and even knew as a child, maybe this is just a kind of a fantasy, but it seemed to be a useful fantasy. You know, what are the voices in my head? Which ones are me? Which ones could potentially be from outside? You know, and the fact that whatever the voice is, the usefulness of it is more important. The applicability. You know, if something's a good idea, it doesn't matter where it comes from. As far as belief systems goes, I always thought that the church and everything was just about 1,000 years out of date. An old system that people had just kept going, like an old machine, like a vintage car, that was just uneconomical. I felt that the Bible was a very confusing book that had created more wars around the planet than anything else. I hated the way that some religious people seem to treat their children and force religion on the children, and Sunday schools and the like. I remember different types of religions like Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses who particularly interest me as they come around knocking on doors and stuff, and Christians, Catholics, and then you got the other, you know, the Muslims and other religions. I'm not that knowledgeable about all the religions of the world, but to me it seems to be, at that age, it seems to be really just out of date thing. And I saw myself more as a Zen Buddhist, you know, when it came into the question, what religion are you? Well, you know, Zen. I believe in nothing, you know. I follow nothing, I want nothing. I kind of loved that aspect of just easiness. It was simple, you could get it, you could learn it in a minute, in a second, in a blink of an eye. Zen. But when we're born into this crazy system, it's like, well, the system's not Zen and you're Zen. Well, there's still a bit to work out. Always been interested in spirit. I remember when I got into drawing, you know, painting, art, when I was a kid, I was quite good at drawing. And I loved the way that you could put spirit onto paper. You could make a piece of paper smile or get angry. And later on, I remember when seeing a cassette recorder, little mono cassette recorders that you had in the 70s. I remember being fascinated at how you could speak and put your voice on this band, on this magnetic tape, and play it back and hear. It was like you captured spirit on cassette. I was fascinated by that. Later on, I was fascinated by cryptology. You know, how spirit could be hidden in plain view in the very tools that we use all the time. Even like 2, 3, 4, 5 different layers of wisdom bound in a few words. You know, like a pie with so many different ingredients, and each person sort of like has their favourite or sees their piece, you know. And then I got into music. Oh no, first actually I got into computers because I saw how like the computer, you could program software so it made it look like the computer was alive and responding to the user. Like the machine had spirit. That's when I got into making like these text adventure games myself, you know, typing in like you are in the woods walking down the street. North, south, east or west, and you know, these types of games. I would hack other games and look at the software and see how it worked, see if I could find out some clues. And that was a lot of levels of cryptology. But then after years of, well, not years, but a lot of time programming, I thought back then, computers, there was no internet, it was all black and white, 16 megabytes. No, it wasn't even that, I think I had 16 kilobytes. It just wasn't enough to really do much with. So I picked up an electric guitar. Thought, I'm going to get out in the world and get more using a guitar. It's like you could put spirit into the notes of a guitar. I'd heard it on rock music, just the spirit was like, whoa, far more than a text adventure, far more than just like a picture or something that, but then putting all of that together, making album covers, making videos, putting music to that seemed to be just the absolute marriage of this whole light and sound to me, of spirit in both, in all. And those hidden layers, for those who are interested in cryptology, that there's always something to find below the layers, some more things worth looking for. Obviously with the music you get into the words, into lyrics of songs, listening to other bands, and that leads you into heavy philosophy about life and back into spirituality. But all the time it seems that music is a religion of its own. And I'm realising I'm not really a Zenist or whatever, not a Buddhist, I'm really a musician, or I'm more of a, I don't know what you would call it. But I like sound. Sound is God, to me at that point. Harmony, music, and art as well, pictures and stuff, the two go together. And it wasn't until years later, trying to make a business out of the things that I love to do in life, music and art and writing and everything else, trying to just bring that innocently to the common man in such a corrupt world, trying to be moral in such a corrupt world, trying to be really straight and open with an audience that isn't used to honesty, trying to be human in a world that's used to seeing masks and fakeness as being the norm. You leave the house, you wear the mask. Setting up standards and virtues to put on each other and police each other almost. I wouldn't do that if I were you. I mean, I like it, but I wouldn't do it if I were you. What will other people think? So after all this time, it's like, I feel like I've really tried to work at my innocence and tried to be righteous and tried to learn, and I've not expected it from other people, not in this world, and I don't mean to kind of try and claim moral high ground, because I don't think intelligence or that lot is necessarily high ground. I think, now is always the point where you've either got high or low ground, and everybody's got that chance now. It's not a status reality where you can gain some kind of status in the world, or standard, in my opinion. Only within yourself, if you learn another language, you can start to speak to people in that other language. But if you don't ever speak to people anyway, then is it applicable? Is it of use? Or is it just a status symbol? Like ownership, property, things that, I have 3 Ferraris and a Porsche. But not all at the same time. I think you get my meaning. So these, like the standard of living, the sociality of it, what we expect from each other. And laws, laws put a lot on that, government laws, rules, whatever you want to call them. It broke my mind, it broke my spirituality, it broke my spirit. Whatever religion, it broke my music, everything that I loved, I started to question because of the system that we live in, the system of governance, the system of positive law. And I ended up in the bottom of a pit, to be honest with you. Like a lot of people, we end up just in a doom and gloom and confused, I don't know if I've ever found my way out of that pit, or whether it's, I don't know, it's metaphors. But in a way everything changed then. I sort of changed direction, turned direction. Thought to myself, everything I know about music and art and everything, I know it. It's a treasure in my heart. I don't need to research it, I don't need to box it up anywhere. It's going to be there. I can change direction and look now at what's going wrong with the world in law. How can I live in such a society if the laws restrict us, restrict me, restrict you? How can I help you if I don't have the power to help myself? Simply because the laws don't provide for people like me. How come the laws provide for the corrupt ones? How come if you've got this killer instinct as a businessman, you can get on in this world? You can have as many cars and things as you want. You can buy people. How come that? How come rich people can just simply buy the way through law, pay the lawyers, win the case even? And how come that can be fair in a society? These are the questions that I set out to look at. I wasn't interested in music anymore. I knew how to do that. That was in my soul, in my heart, in my gut. I didn't need to think music. I lived it. I didn't need to think art. I lived art. I didn't need to think about, eating or food or anything, because I just live that. You see that every day provides. But then there's a blockage. There's a blockage. Because you can't escape the system, but you can't seem to make sense of the system. And it won't let you go. It's like a golem following you, hot on your heels, trying to catch up with you, whether you're free or not free. And it's like if you pay it, you can fight it back. I'm thinking that can't be the world we live in. It can't be just a monetary system. Somewhere didn't I hear that love of money was the root of all evil? So surely, if money solves all problems, then that's the root. The story goes on in my life, to the point where I just nearly lose it and completely just get fed up of the whole thing. I don't even give a shit about what people think of me or anything. I just want to determine my own life, because the way it's been determined by the governments and people of the world is slowly sickening. This is my feeling back then. And I ended up looking in the Bible, because I kind of realised that it can't be that we're surrounded by all this biblical stuff, all these crosses and churches and 7 days a week and calendars of the Pope and Pope Gregory's calendar and Christmas and Easter, and we all live by these things but kind of slate them and slant them off and slag them off or whatever. And it can't be that we live in a world that we deny. That's what I'm thinking. And I picked up the Bible and I tried to read it. I tried to read it for a lot of years, and I just saw an absurd bit of text. But this time I needed to know. So I picked up the Bible and I just needed to know. And I just started just opening it anywhere, just to read little bits of it. I remember years ago I'd hacked the text adventure computer games to see if I could find any clues. And I'd found some. I found key passwords and things, and I could go back into the game and use that. So it was I wasn't really looking to try and understand the whole Bible, but looking for the nature of the text. If this is a legal document, I'm saying to myself, because I'm not looking for some kind of spiritual guides here now. I'm looking for then proof that there's any spirit or any form of good in government whatsoever, or whether it's just evil. Is the government evil? Because the root of all evil is money, and the root of all money is government. So I'm looking in the Bible, and I'm looking and I'm looking and I'm looking, and I kind of then realise. I look at the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not worship any other god but me. I'm thinking, who is me? Whatever that word means, me, it definitely isn't government. Because government can't call itself me. So there it was, the first commandment, the original sin. In fact, this is the command 0, before the numbers were invented. That was it. My hate for the government, my love for the government, my worship for the government, same thing. It's all worship. So you like, it seems that the government has to accept the fact that we're going to hate it, we're going to love it. And that it is playing the baddie, that it is playing the Satan, that it is playing the adversary. So that we go back to ourselves. So that we are forced to worship no other God but me. And I'm reading the Bible in a completely different context, as a totally different genre of book. It's got nothing to do with spiritual accounts of the divine, which has got nothing to do with the creation of the universe, in which God is a title, and the character Yahweh means I am that I am. And if you can read the book with regards to this God, Yahweh, instead of the Western philosophical idea of God, then you get a totally different picture. But as long as we hold on to this man in the sky idea, creator of all things, it kind of just puts it in a childish, adolescent view. A lot of the things that we'd learnt about the Bible from television and from governments and schools and stuff were actually blocking the concepts in law. Now, when I call it a legal document or law, I'm not saying that it's actually that you have to agree or disagree with the laws in it. It's a concept. It's a philosophy of how divine law can be characterized, can be defined. There's two types of law. This is what I'm kind of discovering over the years then. There's, people are talking about common law and how it's law of the land and the statute law and common law, and there's one's called lawful and one's called legal. Well, really, there's no such thing. There's no such difference as law and legal, really. Anything written, anything that's like documented, isn't really law. It isn't really divine law. It's just legislation. Got a car coming past here. So just to make it clear, there's positive law, and then there's unwritten law. Now we can all comprehend to a certain degree unwritten law. That's what we're talking about when people say common law. The thing is, common law is actually, an established system. It's not just don't hurt or anything. Divine law is unspoken. No man can tell you. No man can tell you. No man can tell you. So, but over the thousands of years, philosophers have come up with this, when we're talking about having to judge others on divine law, there has to be some kind of divine school of philosophy. And there are a lot of wise people in this world. It may look like we're all just an idiocracy. But behind that, there's people who are trying to push everything in the right direction. And divine law has to give you the free will to interpret the texts for yourself. But divine law isn't based off you reading from texts, as you know. It's about reading from the heart. So the idea that you get anything from the Bible as far as laws, only kind of you get an understanding of how the government sees divinity. When you've got an institution that's made up of chains of command, them chains have to, at the top of the chain of command at least, have to have some kind of binding in our mutual concept of spirituality. The government's will, or the core, where the government gets its permission from, has to be in alignment with our mutual agreement of what divine will is. Now, we're not talking about some man in the sky that sends snakes and makes trees and things like that. This is a different thing, and I'll talk about the Bible in detail later. Just checking the time. But the idea is there's two types of law, you know, written law, statutes, acts, all anything that's written. And then there's unwritten law, or divine law, divine natural law. So this is what I'm looking at, is how to explain to the world, to you, to me, to myself, to anybody, unspoken law, unwritten law, unwritten and unspoken. Every mother, every father knows how to write divine law when they talk to the kids, you know. Little Jenny goes to little John and takes his money, his pocket money off him, and buys him and saves it, you know, whatever. The moral's in the story, but the child has to kind of get the moral at the end. The you know, the parent is just merely kind of forcing the child to see right from wrong through using the story, you know. Now the Bible's not there to try and make you spiritually see right from wrong. It's just posing moral dilemmas. It's posing situations where law needs to be applied. And taking into consideration, we've got law for kings and queens, and for priests, and for bankers, and for tax collectors, and for artists and lawyers and messengers, for wives and husbands. Every single archetype of person that you can think of is going to be in there. You know, to take into consideration the moral stance. The book is just, it's just so fascinating to see and to read and to realise, yeah, you know, the government is set up as our adversary, so that we're only forced over time to return to ourselves, each to his own, and to work for the greater good. But the greater good in his own way. Each and her should serve the greater good in his own way. We need to be careful of altruism, to not get misunderstood between serving a greater cause and just serving all of the people. Sometimes the crowds, the masses, don't know what's good for them. And obviously in a world where we see that it's en masse, it's derailed, it's gone wrong, then it's a necessity to look inside yourself for the answer. Because if the problem is that we all believe in something because everybody else believes in something, because everybody else believes in something, then we won't break the chain of command. As soon as one of us starts to believe in life, in love, in the higher self, I don't know what the words are, in yourself, with a conviction, and it should be so simple at that point. Everything else just unfolds, you know. And of course life isn't paradise, there's still a lot of challenges all the time. But I think for me one of the main challenges, like I said at the beginning of this video, is to understand why I didn't see it like it was before. So in regards to the Bible, why didn't I see the Bible in that context? Why didn't I look at it like a piece of software, legislation? Why did I think it was some kind of divine account of the divine? Why did I think that kings and queens and countries that are like found their entire documents on it, that it's a worldwide translated document, that it was just such a bunch of pious tales? Why did I think that? Why did I reject the Bible to even read it in that way for so long, to have to force myself to read it in a different way, to only find that I found far more sense in my own interpretation? But it proves that a lot of all religions are merely a school, a spin-off of the Bible. That most of the preachings in religions are just a small part, a small inspiration from one segment of the Bible. And the word religion really means to rejoin. And when we're born into a world that just separates us from ourselves straight away, in all regards, giving us names, giving us legal fictions, giving us inheritances, giving us problems and attitudes that don't even belong to us, giving us a language we didn't choose, that's very difficult. You know, so we didn't inherit all of this stuff that separated ourselves from ourselves. And that was the point where we all joined the system at birth, you know, and that's where the point where we joined a religion called nationality. But we think we think that religion is like actually going into a church and stuff, and we think that the Bible is a religious book. But really, it's an anti-religious book from a position of where we are. Because we've got the wrong religion. The religion is to relege with yourself. Back to the tree of your own spine, you know. You are the tree of life. You are the tree of knowledge. Don't go eating your own knowledge of good and bad. Just keep it as knowledge. You know, don't listen to snakes. People who are telling you, like, you know, with forked tongues, stories about snakes. You know, look at the characters for what they are. Look at the Bible as characters in a story, just like any other story. You know, but look at it as like a legal, connected with our society, you know. And so for me, you know, I don't know where the thread of this thing's going. It's very foggy. I don't even know if I've walked the wrong direction. So yeah, camera battery and everything's going. So, and I nearly got lost. I just found my way unlost. It's quite foggy out here. Lose direction. So I'm gonna, in the future videos, I'm gonna take very much time and care and add visuals to explain some of the detailed bits of law and divine law and positive law. So I'll see you soon. Bye for now. Cheerio.